I am very thrilled that Rebecca agreed to present to us today. So several months ago, I don't even remember when, sometime during COVID shutdown, we reached out to Rebecca, who then put us in touch with some representatives from the Tongva community to ask whether it would be good to even do a land acknowledgement. Is that too much of just sort of virtue signaling? It doesn't accomplish anything? Or is that a great foundation, a place to start, to actually as a community intentionally put something together to say that we acknowledge that this is unceded land that we are currently worshiping on? And they were very supportive of that idea as a beginning place. And so our church council is going to vote on that land acknowledgement at their next meeting, and then it's going to be brought to the congregation at our January congregational meeting. But as part of that, we wanted to provide educational sessions to have deeper discussions about Native Americans, indigenous communities, and help us understand a little bit more about the history here in California and around the United States. And so this Sunday and next Sunday, our adult education sessions will be focused on that topic. You'll see the title today is Changing the Narrative About Native Americans. And so I'm sure that she is going to teach us something that we don't already know. And then next week, we're going to have presenters specifically from the Tongva community to teach us about the history of the Tongva. So Rebecca, glad you're with us. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Pastor Jacob. And again, I'm so sorry I can't be there with all of you. I was really sick earlier this week, and I got a rapid test, which thankfully came back negative. But in an abundance of caution, I just wanted to make sure that I stayed in my little sick hidey hole until I was completely better. My voice is still a tiny bit froggy, so I apologize. And with that, I'm going to go straight into being traditional. So, Miriam Notung Rebecca Yaka. Hello, my name is Rebecca Tortes. I just have introduced myself in Luiseño. I'm just saying hello. My name is Rebecca, and I'm a human. And we say we're human because in our world, we are all related to our plants and animals and to the general ecosystem. So we just need to make sure that we say, hey, I'm a human when we're having a conversation with somebody, so you kind of know who you're dealing with right out the gate. I'm happy to be zooming in with you here from Claremont in, as Pastor Jacob said, the unceded ancestral territories of the Gabrielino Tongva. And I'm just a visitor in their homelands. I actually am originally from Riverside, California. So I am Cahuilla and Luiseño on my grandfather's side. On my grandmother's side, I am Luiseño, Cahuilla, and Assiniboine Sioux. So I'm going to give you just a brief background on the work that I do, kind of where I'm coming from in terms of framing for this. And I went back and forth on what I was going to present on this call. Gosh, probably for the whole week. It's probably good that I was sick because I had a lot of time to think about this, because I really wanted to make sure that I was touching on the things that I thought were important, but that changed on the day-to-day basis on what I was currently dealing with during that day. So a little bit about me. I have worked here in Southern California with tribal communities for a little bit over 20 years, mostly in grant writing and project development. I've also served as a tribal administrator. I've had the honor of working with cultural practitioners for about the past 15 years. I was the previous executive director of California Indian Basket Weavers Association. I am a basket weaver, although I like to say that I am a function over form basket weaver, in that it is a basket, but it is not exactly the most beautiful basket that you will ever see. Recently, I launched a statewide philanthropic fund called the California Tribal Fund. We are the first fund in the history of California that is Native controlled and led, that works just to fund California tribes and tribal nonprofits, both federally and state recognized. And I got into that work because of, working with tribal populations for so long and working with federal, going after federal, state, and private philanthropic funding. We really got into that conversation of what does the narrative about Native Americans look like at the federal, state, and local level, and what are some common misconceptions that we have. And I think that one of the things that I want to say is that I deeply encourage anybody that has questions to please ask questions. This is a safe space. I know that everybody in this space is here as an ally, and there are no dumb questions. There are only questions. So I'm happy to answer those. And with that, I will get going into my presentation, my official presentation. So this is a picture of me, so now you can see me. And that's my daughter, Zadie, who also is Native American, because she's my daughter. But one of the things that I always like to start with is, one of those, really, you don't look like you're an Indian conversations. We have a misrepresentation of what a Native American looks like, in today's culture. I always joke that, I parked my buffalo in the back, or, my teepee's getting repairs, those types of things right now, just to kind of break the ice when people say, really, you don't look like you're Indian, because I don't think that people know necessarily what Native Americans look like, in day-to-day society. And we're going to go through the reason why maybe that occurs. So first of all, what is narrative and what is narrative change? Narrative is the broadly accepted story that reinforces ideas, norms, issues, and expectations in society. So it's created by stories passing along between family and friends, by the news media, by entertainment. This day and age is so strongly affected by entertainment and pop culture, by education, which is very, very important, public art, and by policies and much more. Due to the work that I deal with working in philanthropy, I am very policy driven, but we can get to that in a little bit. Narrative often reinforces stereotypes and the status quo, and it allows oppressive systems and norms to stay in place. The dominant narrative is a lens through which history is told from the perspective of the dominant culture. And here in America, we are pretty, I don't need to explain what the dominant narrative is in America, or the dominant culture. So narrative change is an intentional effort to replace an existing narrative with something new. And it's a powerful contributor to social change. Narratives changes can lead to shifts in attitudes, behaviors, practices, and policies. And again, that's what's most important to me personally, and can lead to deeper and lasting change in systems and cultures. And because this is being recorded, I need to enter my normal disclaimer that a lot of the information I will be presenting on is based on research that my employer, First Nations Development Institute, conducted. Most of this information is information that I created on my own, and I'm sharing from other research. But any of the opinions expressed here are my own and not of my employer, although my employer probably would not care. They're even more rowdy than I am, but I just want to say the opinions expressed are my own, and obviously I am very proud of those opinions, but that's the caveat. So in one of the things that I struggle with a lot of times working with philanthropic funders and working with policymakers and, the feds, so to speak, is this idea of having to qualify why the work that we do is important, why we are still here, what we are working on, and a lot of the things that we engage in aren't there. They're things that can be felt and not necessarily seen in a way that is, qualitative and science-based and evaluations-based. And so my employer from 2015 to 2018 conducted one of the most comprehensive, unprecedented research campaigns that was designed to increase the understanding of the dominant narrative about Native American people here in the United States. So they got together 28 focus groups that were completed in 11 states. We did that both in person and online. We did extensive message testing discussion groups, both with Native Americans from 21 different tribes and with online groups with non-natives. And we did 45 in-depth interviews with members of Congress, formal political appointees, judges, foundation officers, like how I work in philanthropy, civil rights leaders, business and entertainment leaders. And then we did a survey of nearly 15,000 people on key issues and perceptions regarding Native people, Facebook posts, and then they did like a super comprehensive social media posts. They analyzed social media posts. So that is just to say again, that the things that I'm presenting on, there was a lot of research that went behind them. This was unprecedented research that they engaged in. And really, what did it tell us? It told us everything we already knew. But it's funny when you have to walk into a room with certain people that this kind of helps, so to speak, your cause when you're talking to philanthropic funders, when you're speaking to federal and state representatives. But I just wanted to kind of give you the background about this study. So what did this study tell us? The study told us that Native American people, we have a romanticized past, and yet we have an invisible present. And that contemporary Native Americans are, for the most part, invisible in the United States. Some of the most inaccurate and common beliefs that came up through this research is that people believe that our populations are declining or gone. That can be for a number of reasons. They also believe that our culture, as in modern day culture, including our languages, our land tending ceremonies, etc., that they're no longer practiced. Coupled with that, they do believe that most of us only still continue to live on reservations. And obviously, with living on reservations, is that our dominant narrative is one of deficit and disparity. Poverty, alcoholism, domestic violence, obesity, so many other things. And again, one of the things that I have been told most often is, oh, you don't look like you're Native American. You're thin, or you don't look like you're Native American. You're this, like you don't look like you're Native American. You're educated. It's one of those things that I don't think people realize that the way that words shape, the narrative. Again, sometimes we're often grouped under one label. Indigenous is often a catch-all. I want to say with the caveat before I get into the indigenous, there is a lot of conversation within our communities regarding the term indigenous. You realize what it means. It is it is a correct term in terms of, calling people indigenous, but a lot of things in today's society, there's a catch-all term. So one of the things that that indigenous people are now being included in is, BIPOC. And it's one of those things that we see in communities. It makes it easier. It's more palatable for us to be grouped in with one population. But there are, just in California alone, I just wanted to let you know, there are approximately 100, as of today, I made sure I checked my database today, that we have 110 federally recognized tribes here in California. And there's about 81 that are currently seeking federal recognition. So just, kind of like a friend to friend thing. Usually we like to be referred to by our tribal affiliation. So rather than saying, oh, this is my Native American friend or my indigenous friend, just one of those things that is a nice thing to say, like, oh, this is my friend Rebecca. She was with the Cahuilla and Sioux, or things like that. So related to that, one of the things that people still think is that the wrongs committed in by the government to Native American people are in the distant past. But also related to that, even though those wrongs are committed from distant past, we still continue to benefit from government handouts. I almost said next slide because usually somebody's saying, usually someone's next slide for me. So what are some of the reasons why this occurs, why those common misconceptions exist? Some of the things are, we live in America in a system that is structurally racist, continues to be. It's a system in which public policies, institutional practices, cultural representations, and other norms are working often to reinforce ways that perpetuate racial group inequity. We have a lot of institutional racism still, and that's the policies and practices that exist within institutions that, whether intentionally or not, produce outcomes that chronically favor or put a racial group at a disadvantage. And then also, there's cultural representations that, I'm so sorry if you can hear the train. They refer to popular stereotypes, images, frames, and narratives that are socialized and reinforced by media, languages, and other forms of mass communication. And my favorite one, the good old-fashioned common sense. It's just common sense, This is one of those places where I thought, oh, should I include all of the ugly, racist mascots that are out there, or my favorite, the Peter Pan, Princess Tiger Lily, or Pocahontas, or anything like that. We've all seen those, we know what they look like. So instead, I chose to include this beautiful picture of an elder's hand that is doing some harvesting, which I think is so much more beautiful. So where do these beliefs come from? First of all, they come from the education system and history. And this is, again, data that was pulled. This is from 2016, but I'm sure that things haven't changed that much since then. I was looking for 2020, but I could not find any new research, which means that we'll just have to do that research now. But 87% of content taught about Native Americans includes only pre-1900 contexts. And especially here in California, I can tell you a whole lot happened in between 1900 and 2021. But, and then 27 states do not even name an individual Native American in their history standard. So there's not one Native American name that can be found in a history standard in 27 states, which I just find so sad, because there are so many awesome Native American people that I'm taught about. The media, 97% of images that appear in internet searches for Native Americans, again, are antiquated pre-1900 portrayals of Native people. They are the tinotypes, they are things that you would see in your history books of quote unquote, the first Thanksgiving or things like that. Representation of Native people on TV and film is less than 4%. And this is where I actually found some brand new information, because I know that we actually do have a lot of shows right now that are getting more traction, including Reservation Dogs on Hulu, which is a wonderful, I will do a plug for it, which is a wonderful show. There's Molly of Denali, which is an awesome cartoon that's currently on, I believe it's on TBS, but it's a great little cartoon too. But according to the 2020 Hollywood Diversity Report, our representation in film is actually 3%. So it's gone down since I think 2005. And in television, it's 0.3%. Sorry, not 3%, 0.3%. And in television, it's about 0.6%. So when Native Americans are actually included in media depictions, they are usually shown as a particular type of Native American. So for example, Sioux, Navajo, or Apache. So I call this the TP and Hogan effect. So it's either the TPs or the Hogans that you'll see in terms of Native American people when there are over 500 Native nations here in the United States. But those will what you'll see in the media. The one thing that, because I live in California, I didn't seem to think about, but that we found in our research, is that proximity actually really shapes people's understanding of Native Americans. And it's that the average US resident experiences nearly no direct daily interaction with Native Americans. Living in California, we're a little bit different in terms of that, because of our proximity to a lot of reservations and to tribal people. But only 14 states have American Indian populations that exceed 100,000 people. So what do all these things do? They lead to this perception of otherness, and it helps to shape that narrative that portrays Native American people as insular and aloof, old-fashioned, and not of the 21st century. The truth, our truth is what I call it, the truth. Native people actually have different customs, traditions, and laws. There were, here in California even, there were 80 unique languages that were spoken. There are still 20 being spoken today. According to the 2020 census, our populations are increasing. They increased from 5.2 million in 2010 to 9.7 million in 2020. This makes American Indian and Alaskan Natives actually represented 2.9% of the US population. One of the things that helped with that is that, we were able, this 2020 census was able to capture data a little bit better. So you were able to self-identify and combine, like I would say, like I'm Caucasian, but I'm also Native American. You could do combinations on that. A lot of people don't know that Los Angeles County actually is home to the second largest concentration of Native American people. Like I said before, California is home to 110 federally recognized tribes, and 81 are currently petitioning to federal recognition. Related to that, San Diego County actually has the most tribes per square mile of anywhere in the United States, and not a lot of people that live in San Diego actually even know that. There are still approximately 150 indigenous languages that are currently spoken in the United States. And 20 of them are here in California. Indigenous people have and are continuing to work on getting ancestral land back. They're continuing to manage, they're continuing to engage in land stewardship techniques that, that probably for the wrong reason are gaining widespread recognition, but it's gaining more widespread recognition related to climate change, and especially here in California, related to our fire seasons. And this is my first slide, I think my second slide with pictures. So just, I wanted to show some of the, the beauty and the difference in the ecology that related to some of our tribes here in California. So the top slide is from the Chemehuevi Indian Reservation, which is on the border of Arizona and California. It's beautiful, beautiful land. The middle is actually, it's a Maidu territory. There's a story actually related to that. They just regained, they were the first tribe to regain, was over 3,000 acres of their ancestral land that they're currently managing. The bottom is La Posta Reservation in San Diego County. And I work with all three of those tribes. I'm very excited on it. So, now we're going to go into like a little bit of history. We had talked a bit about, the idea of people thinking that things were in the past, but we also somehow Native American people that do exist, that they're getting things off the government. And I kind of want to talk to a little bit of history by why these things matter. I think maybe I messed up my slide. Oh, here we go. Sorry, this is the first one. Let's go back one. Don't put things together when you're under the influence of well. So why does narrative matter? And then we'll go back to the other slide. So narrative matters because it shapes policy at the federal, state, and local level. I mean, narrative matters in day-to-day conversations, yes, but what will, is it the bottom-up approach or is it a top-down approach? For the work that I do, I focus on things that will shape policy at the federal, state, and local level. So some of the things that that narrative affects, rather than just kind of being a mean person, it affects voting rights and access. It affects where Indian children are placed in terms of foster homes or adoptions. It affects violence against Native American women and how those cases are treated. It affects healthcare access for our elders and for our veterans. It affects how our land and water are protected. And guess what? Land and water are like everybody's responsibility. So I'm always telling people it's something that you definitely should care about. So some of the things that are going on currently, as in today, are related to voting rights and access. There is a new act that has been introduced. It was last month, I believe, by the Highlands and the Native American Voting Rights Act. A lot of voter suppression still continues to take place in tribal communities. We do not have, especially on reservations in rural areas, we do not have, a lot of us have post office boxes and or non-physical addresses that the tribe that mail can be delivered to. So some of the things that happened in our last election is, this is one of the coolest stories in New Mexico. Some of our tribes use GPS data to prove that they lived in a place in order to be able to vote. But those are things that tribal people today in 2020 in 2021 are still dealing with. Regarding the Indian Child Welfare Act in Texas in April of this year, there was a family that was trying to keep custody of a Navajo boy, and the tribe is actually there. I believe it's gone up to the Supreme Court now. If that child being taken away from them and being handed over to the tribe goes against if it's a discriminatory action based on the fact that they were not tribal. Violence against women, there's still cross-jurisdictional cooperation issues that are happening in terms of people not being prosecuted in a timely manner, people slipping through the cracks, women that are Native American not being considered a missing person, related to that narrative, maybe they're just out drinking or doing drugs or things like that, just in terms of statutes related to that. Healthcare access, there are urban versus rural and bureaucratic issues. One of the tribes I work with is located in Kern Valley, and even though it takes an hour to drive to their reservation, they are considered a urban tribe. So during the time of COVID, if they wanted to get shots or if they wanted to get healthcare, they had to jump in their car and drive an hour down a mountain to access healthcare because they were considered an urban reservation. Protection of water and land. One of the things that I'm following very closely right now is a lithium mining that's taking place on sacred sites in Thacker's Patch. It's with the California Nevada tribe. Pyramid Lake's another tribe that's dealing with that as well, but they're continuing to fight those types of issues. And why does that narrative matter? Because the narrative matters in terms of our local, state, and federal officials that we have to interact with, which a lot of them don't actually understand what tribal sovereignty is. So I'm going to go back one slide, and talk about that a little bit. So tribal sovereignty refers to the rights of American Indians and Alaskan Natives to govern themselves. And if anybody ever wants to get into constitutional laws or constitutional conversations, about this, the U.S. Constitution recognizes that Indian tribes are distinct governments, and they have, with very few exceptions, the same powers as federal and state governments to regulate their internal affairs. So sovereignty includes the right to establish our own form of government, determine membership requirements, enact legislations, and establish laws and court systems. And actually, California, there are a lot of tribes here in California that have established really amazing court systems, actually. But related to that, the federal government has what's called a trust responsibility. So the origin of that trust responsibility was that between 1776 and 1871, Congress had entered into nearly 400 treaties with tribes here in the United States. Most of all those treaties, obviously, was to obtain land at the least cost to no cost to federal government. In exchange for the land, the government to be promised that it would set aside a reservation for the tribe, and that it would guarantee and respect that tribe's sovereignty over that land. So that is divided into three components. So it's the protection of that trust land and the right to use those lands, that protection of the sovereignty and the right to self-government. But related to that, the government also said, we will provide basic social, medical, and education services for tribal nations. Which goes back into that false narrative of, okay, you know, there are handouts, even though it is, again, this is something that was written into the Constitution and was written into these treaties. By the way, every single treaty in the United States is some way has been violated by the United States government. And also here in California, all the treaties with that took place during the gold rush were all unratified. They were literally put in drawers. So that is why California, we have a unique history in terms of federally and non-federally recognized tribes, and people still don't understand how the reservations were allotted and who got what. So a little bit of common misconceptions, a little bit of history on you know, how we got here. And now it's like, well, how can I help? How can I be a part of a narrative change in both small and large ways to make sure that, you know, I'm making a difference? And sometimes it can seem very overwhelming, but there are things that all of us can do in terms of changing the narrative about Native Americans. So whenever I get into these conversations with you know, funders or well-intentioned people that are like, how can I be an ally? You know, how can I use my platform to give voice to others? You know, am I inadvertently contributing to a false or negative narrative? You know, by not taking account or including contemporary Native peoples in my work. You know, how can I be part of a respectful process? You know, what are some tools I can use to shape this new narrative? And how can I swiftly and strongly correct false narratives when I see them? Oops. These are the kind of top, I think I put 5 things that I always encourage people to do, you know. And the first is to advocate to ensure that Native people are visible, which is what our church is doing also, you know. When we're organizing gatherings or when we are at, you know, a business, a church, you know, a presentation of any kind, try to find out what tribe traditionally occupies the land that you're meeting at, you know, and open your meeting and acknowledge whose land that you're on. It is literally the first step, one of the easiest steps that you can do, just for people to say, oh, okay, yeah, there were people that were here before us and continue to be here, is one of the things as well. You know, learn about Native peoples and tribes or region to understand cultural context, historical perspectives and connections to place that may impact perspectives or approaches on issues that they're dealing with. One of the greatest tools that I always tell people to use is, you know, Native Lands California. It provides an interactive map that will provide data on the area that you're in, original languages and tribal ties. We have so many wonderful resources here in Southern California. There are some really great tribal cultural centers and museums. Malfi Museum in Cabazon Valley is one of my favorite, smallest but mightiest organizations that I always go to and learn a lot about that area. There are tribes here in Los Angeles, Gabrielina Tonga, Fernando Tautanium. They have events that go beyond just a powwow. You know, they have basketry events, language events, you know, nature walks, so many things. So I always encourage people to follow these types of organizations, you know, cultural centers and tribes. And with social media, they're great. They're all out there. They're on Instagram. You know, advocate for accurate Native American history. So if you're a parent, if you're a grandparent, if you're a teacher, you know, advocate for your state or local school board to adopt a policy to teach accurate Native American history and contemporary facts. So if you're a state district or local school administrator, you know, there is history curriculum resources that are out there. and they can help ensure what your students are learning is accurate and advances in the narrative. There is, I put a link in here too. This is a great resource. It's from the Smithsonian. They have a lot of curriculum and that are for a variety of different ages. One of the things that I actually really felt my heart warmed when I moved here and my daughter started attending Oakmont is we had gone to the Robert Redford Conservancy, and then they had a whole week in terms of a science camp to talk about, you know, local Native American people and Tonga people and their creation stories and some of their traditional foods and such. And one of my favorite stories that my daughter told me is that she was going through the curriculum and she was talking to some of her friends and she goes, oh, I know these people. My mom knows them. You know, we're Native American. And everyone stopped. And again, it was like, what? You don't look like you're Native American. But it was one of those things where she said, she's like, oh, I got to feel like a sense of pride. Like, I'm like, yeah, I know all these people. I know. We call a lot of people aunties and uncles in our community. So I know that person. They do this, they do that. But, you know, I was very happy to see that Claremont had just even a little bit of information on that. It really helped my daughter feel like, oh, people know a little bit of our history. Once again, you know, focus on the strengths, resilience, and contributions of Native American people. There are so many stories that are out there on a daily basis that, you know, support an asset-based narrative. I really, really always strongly support an asset-based narrative and not this, you know, trauma porn, for lack of a better term, that I see so many times floating around. You know, talk about the strengths, resilience, and contributions of our people. Share stories that support this new narrative on social media and newsletters and other publications. And don't just do it on Native American History Month or, you know, for Thanksgiving. Native American people are doing things on a daily basis. One of the two publications that I really love, News Creative California. They are a quarterly magazine, but they also have a website. I have been a supporter from them for many, many years. Indian Country Today always has some wonderful stories that they're sharing. And again, understand sovereignty. You know, Native American people are not receiving handouts. They are, you know, not like living in this lawless land, as I've heard people say. You know, the United States, throw that Constitution right back at them. You know, the Constitution, you know, states that sovereign nations have the right to form their own governments. You know, if they're actually, you know, people that have the, you know, Constitution as a sticker on their car probably should understand and respect that. You know, it's a recognized nation, and they're able to govern themselves. Actually, I tell people there are actually 3 types of governments here in the United States: the federal government, the state government, and tribal governments. You know, be aware of current policies and legislations that are going on. You know, uninformed ally is a strong ally, I like to tell people. If you, the National Congress of American Indians usually has wonderful little policy blurbs and news and updates of things that are going on. I have an hour of my week each week just blocked out so I can, you know, check on that. They do great little synopsises on issues that are populations. If you do have the means to, you know, consider donating to Native-controlled philanthropic organizations. I would be remiss if I didn't say, you know, I work for First Nations Development Institute. We are the largest Native-controlled philanthropic organization in the United States. We have 22 Native program officers. Great. It's a great organization. Other great organizations are Indian Collective, And Illuminatives is also a wonderful organization. They are all tribally controlled philanthropic organizations. Okay, I'm going to give it three more minutes, and then if anyone has questions, I will give. So I thought I made this long enough, but just really quick. So when we're talking about what it looks like to engage with somebody in like a conversation, I love myself because I'm a visual learner. I love myself like a little chart. So the way I think about it when I'm talking to people is, what is the problem or it's the opportunity? Let's use asset-based, thinking there too. So what is the opportunity? And I try to approach people as, we're all human. We have certain values that we share, and let's try to work from those shared value systems. So opportunity. And then I'm going to discuss values, history, and visibility. And then that gets to my call of action. So kind of what it looks like in terms of when I have a conversations with people. Here we go. Native American and mascots are kind of the easiest one. So what's the value that we as tribal people, as Americans, as maybe you're Hispanic, you're Indian, you're African American, all these things. What do we all come to the table with? We usually have our own family stories, our own culture and heritage. That's a part of who we are and how we define ourselves. So what's our shared values? How can we use that in a human-based, call to action? No one deserves to have their heritage insulted or ridiculed. Yet for hundreds of years, Native Americans have been mocked and dehumanized by slurs and images of tea mascots. And it happens everywhere, elementary schools, professional sports, that leads to a visibility problem when people are mistakenly believe that these mascots are harmless or, even respectable, that they're actually dehumanizing Native American people, and they are doing psychological harm to Native children and to youth. That is something that has also been studied. So what's your call to action? It's time to eliminate the use of Native American names, symbols, images, and mascots. So that's kind of one of the ways that when I'm framing a conversation with somebody in terms of wanting to change like a narrative with them. Okay. Oh, this is a positive note. So sometimes I feel like even with these are heavy conversations to have, some of the things that I have seen in the past 2 years here in California, and some of the things that I am personally working on. One of the things that is the biggest things in our communities is access to land and land stewardship. So these are just kind of 3 of the things that I've worked on in the past 3 years that just goes to show that Native American people are working hard to reclaim their land. Like I had said before, in it's Humbug Valley, that's what it's called. A large parcel of land was, the first time in California that a non-recognized tribe was given back land. Of course, the president, that just happened the last 2 years. Up in Humboldt, they are creating a community land trust that is helping them be able to make control of their land in perpetuity. I can never say that right. One of the things that I am working on currently is I'm working with a group of 3 tribes in Mendocino County. We've worked with a senator up there to create a bill, which is going to be transferring ownership of a property to a nonprofit that is consisting of 3 tribes, and they're working on that right now. That's one of the first things, one of the groundbreaking legislation that's happening right now. So there are great stories, and the reason why these stories are happening is because somebody somewhere did engage in changing the narrative with these politicians, changing the narrative with these community land trust people, changing the narrative with just owner of a piece of land. So these things have large scale positive consequences. And or outcomes, I shouldn't say consequences, sorry, I'm a parent. With that, I have like 8 minutes. If anyone would like to ask a question, I would love to answer it, or I can also have anything in the chat box.
Hi, Rebecca, how you doing? Thank you so much. This is a wonderful, wonderful presentation.
Can you just comment on the California Native American Graves Protection and Reparation Act? I know that Assemblyman Ramos introduced AB 275, which I guess reinforces the act that was passed in 2001.
Yes, yes. Oh wow, I love it. So without getting technical, so to talk to other people about it, here in California, so NACPA is supposed to, so the history of this is that before, when people here in California were doing, constructing buildings or shopping centers or such, people's human remains were being found, and there was literally be putting into dumpsters or things like that. So several years ago, there was a bill that was passed that required anything that was disturbing earth on a project, you would have to consult with tribes that was in that territory. So you have to send out a letter to tribes to say, hey, we're going to be doing digging. They pay tribes for their culture monitors to come and make sure that sacred sites are being protected. If anything is unearthed, it's going back in the ground. If bodies are found, that there's protocol related to that. Assemblyman Ramos, even with those types of laws in place, he is just working to strengthen those laws. So that's something that he's working on currently. I do not know the specifics of how that strengthens the existing NAGPRA laws, but I know that that's just part of strengthening those laws. But a lot of people don't realize that they're here in California. Anything that breaks ground, I believe it's more than 10 inches, it does have to have a cultural site monitor on it, and there are processes in place. I don't know if you're talking about repatriation of human remains. Is that what you're discussing as well?
Thank you for your presentation. One more quick question. We have a cabin up in the mountains of Colorado, a little town called Silverton, and the students there in the school have put together a land acknowledgement statement, and they've gotten the school board and the town government, and they're now going after the county government to acknowledge that the land that Silverton is located on is land that was formerly occupied by the Ute Nation. Are there examples of similar sort of efforts that you're aware of in California?
For school to do it?
Pardon?
Did you say for school to do it?
For anybody putting together land acknowledgement statements that are then endorsed and passed by ordinance by local governments to confirm the fact for everyone that the land that they are occupying is land that was formerly part of Native American tribes.
Yes, there are some great sources for that. I don't know if anything. Sorry, I'm always used to doing presentations for funders, and I go, oh, I can just follow up and send you. If I put my email in the chat, I'm happy to send anybody a resource for. I have several resources actually list-wise for how you can put together a land acknowledgement, statement, what that looks like, best practices and such. There are so many tools online, both at my employer and at those different Illuminative and Indian Collective that can help with that. There are countless school districts that are working on that right now, but it's just, again, it's like a local level type of thing.